So one thing that's become very popular in videography is the use of a neutral density filter, or an ND filter. Now these are most commonly analogized, compared to sunglasses for your camera. The reason why you would want to do this isn't just really for protection for the lens, but it also helps in super sunny environments. Now, there's two takeaways from it. One, it will help lower the shutter speed. It will help you get a lower shutter speed that's usable. And why that's important with filming is that if the shutter speed is too high in a video, it'll give it kind of a jagged look when there's movement. So if you're running across the screen, it'll be like these multiple stops without any fluid motion. Now, the lower that is, the more motion blur you can get, and usually you want it to be 1/120th of a second if you're filming in 24p. But obviously if it's going at 500, 600, 1000, 2000, it's going to be a lot more stuttery. So that's one thing. Another thing is that it also helps reduce the contrast a little bit. When things are super high contrast in a video, especially when it's the raw video, things can look a little crunchy, and it's better if you want to add contrast to do that a little bit later. So with a neutral density filter, it can also help lower that a little bit. So with protecting the lens, lowering your shutter speed, and getting better contrast, it's a solid argument to get one. Now this video isn't necessarily about neutral density filters for cameras. This one is about neutral density filters for drones. Now some of you already know that I fly the Parrot Anafi, which has been a very solid drone that I've been very happy with and super impressed with the quality of footage it gets, which I feel has only been aided by the neutral density filter that I got for it. So today I'm going to show you some comparison video between using one versus not using one, and if the difference means anything to you at all. One thing that's worth mentioning is that if you want to be able to use the neutral density filter, you're going to have to apply it after the drone turns on and calibrates. Otherwise it'll start doing its calibration and the filter will block it from doing so, causing an error message saying that the lens is blocked. Okay, with this takeoff sequence, there is a discernible difference between the two in smoothness. On the left, that is without the filter, and as we're moving above the trees, I'm watching it, and it's noticeably a little bit more jagged, whereas on the right, with the filter, it's more smooth. The color difference is interesting, because the one without the filter looks a little bit more toned down, whereas with the filter it is not. Just by a hair, and usually it should be flipped. All right, let's take a look at another sequence. With the filter, there's much more flare. Again, a bit of a smoother image, and in this instance the image looks a little bit warmer. However, the difference between the two, it actually looks a slight bit crunchier on this one, and this one looks more crisp. So it seems that the overall detail is slightly diminished in some instances depending on the lighting, and I can kind of tell why that is. So with another surface for light to pass through, especially since it's plastic, if it's not perfectly clean, and the fact that it's darker, it kind of does give it a little bit more haze. So probably worse that it's plastic, but in other instances where it doesn't have direct light hitting it, it actually looks pretty good. It's one thing I'm noticing right away. Definitely smoother frames though, which I can greatly appreciate. Now, you can have more control over this if you handle everything with manual settings. I left it to automatic because I wanted to see what the camera would want to do to adjust things. And it definitely did. So with the shot on the left, when I would take off into the bright light, it went to 2000 FPS. Not that it recorded in that, but the Shutter speed was at 2000, and I think even bumped it to 4000 at one point, whereas this on the right with the filter only went up to about 600 or so at max, which is really good. And I think most of the time when it was out of direct sunlight, it remained at 200. Again, out of the direct sunlight, the image is fantastic. It's when the sun hits the filter that it kind of flares up and gets kind of hazy. That does change how you shoot things. Let's take a moment to appreciate how close I got to hitting this tree without hitting it. Now, I'm a fantastic pilot. So some closing thoughts on the filter. It definitely does help with reducing shutter speed in bright environments, which gives you smoother motion, which is a little more cinematic, and it definitely helps out with that, which I greatly appreciate. However, I think the quality of the filter you buy will determine whether you get that hazing effect. Now, these are plastic filters because they're cheap. In fact, I don't think you can get one for the Anafi that isn't plastic. I don't think anyone has bothered to really engineer a product for this sadly underrated device. Now, as far as color, the results varied. In some instances, I felt it improved the footage, and in other instances, in direct light, it didn't really. The fact that the camera didn't have to compensate for overexposure at half the time does help, but in some instances, the whites were still kind of blindingly white. So I think that as far as color, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. This is a very tiny sensor after all. But the mere fact that you can get footage flying and look a whole lot smoother instead of having such a high shutter speed, I think that does make it worth the investment for some type of flights. Now, would I leave this on the lens at all times? Not really. But on super bright days when I want smooth footage, absolutely. But as for a clear discernible difference between the two, it really takes a discerning eye to be able to spot the difference. There is a little bit of a difference, but it's hard to tell which one they belong to and if they're in fact that much better. Now, if you are interested in trying out this filter, I will put a link to it in the description below. That's it for me, guys.